This video is brought to you by the incredible adaptation this week. I was starting to think A1 was not capable of this anymore. Episode 6 of Sword Art Online Alicization War of Underworld marks the beginning of Volume 16, Alicization Exploding. While you have the war spark up, along with some explosions and explosive emotions, we are yet to experience why this volume is called Alicization Exploding. Welcome everyone, it's me GamerTurk, your most reliable source of Sword Art Online information, with Alicization Explained featuring War of Underworld Episode 6, Battle of the Knights. As always, timestamps to individual plot points are in the description, as well as a pinned comment for easy navigation, but to give you a quick rundown, that was an incredible adaptation. There were minor cuts and changes, but trust me, they were really minor and nitpicking about them would be a disservice to this episode, and on top of that, so many minor details were included in this episode that it was breathtaking as a light novel reader. Naturally, not everything can be explained without a narration as we have in the novels, so things like what happened with the leader of Giant Sigurosig or Takira's outburst, those are the kind of things we'll cover in this explained episode. I'm also seeing some people being displeased with this episode, but hey, this is the nature of War of Underworld, and I have been warning you about this since early Human Realm arc because most of you had so unreasonable expectations as to what Sword Art Online or Alicization arc in specific actually is. If you prefer having personal clashes of swords, War of Underworld is not for you. If you don't like emotions over action or personal dilemmas and thoughts, then Alicization as a whole is not for you. The series has suffered enough from blind haters. We certainly don't need to suffer just as much from people who just keep watching because they think Kirito is a god and just complain the entire Alicization that he somehow is not a god. So do both of us a favor and just stop watching because Alicization is simply not in line with your false expectations. Yeah, that was a longer intro than usual because I'm getting tired of these kinds of alleged quote-unquote fans who simply have a distorted idea of what a show is and that they create in their own heads to justify their silly expectations. But either way, if you're new to my Explain series, what I do here is essentially provide you all the vital information on characters, events, action, lore from the source material, light novels, things that the anime did not convey properly or just did not have the time to, so you can still see the full picture. So make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to not miss any of the details in the upcoming weeks, and gain an immunity shield against the pawns of Emperor Vecta, swiftly spreading misinformation and uncontrolled spoilers like a pack of foxes. But then again, if you want to read the books for yourselves for the amazing experience, Amazon and Book Depository affiliate links are in the description and the knowledge of Stacia awaits you there. Let's start with a detailed summary. Episode 6 has started with the content of Sword Art Online Volume 16, Alicization Exploding. Since War of Underworld chapters come with a bajillion different perspectives and the anime is trying to bundle these into a coherent narrative, instead of a jumbled mess of point of views that simply wouldn't work properly in anime format, it kinda results in the exact page counts of adaptation becoming a bit blurry as even within chapters things get shuffled a lot, but generally speaking episode 6 has adapted volume 16, chapter 18 part 1 and about half of part 2, roughly speaking 60 pages. Well, that may seem a lot in terms of page count, since it's mostly full-blown action, things are moving faster as well, so I would not be surprised if they manage to finish off volume 16 in just 4 episodes. We start with the same visuals we saw last episode, but this time it's all about introducing the battle formations properly along with the characters themselves. If you were curious how the entire army of 50,000 soldiers of the Dark Territory are hearing Gabriel's measly shouting efforts, that glowing device right there, fueled by dark arts, in front of him is acting like a microphone and each general has a receiver device, so yeah, that's why if you had questions about it. On the Human Empire side, I know some people have questions as to why 2 long-range units are in the front line, specifically Düsselbert and Fanatio, and it's very simple really, and it has 2 reasons. First off, look at the back line first. Sheita and Renly are not particularly trusted with such an important mission of actually shouldering the front line, you know, so those 2 need to stay in the back lines. Berkuli, as the main commander of the battle, too must stay in the back, and there's one more reason he's away from the actual combat that I will not spoil you on, but the anime does provide some hints as to what it is. Alice, of course, up in the air has a very specific task as well, as she must drain the spatial resources in the field so that the dark mages can't chant their dark arts. And the only experienced knights that remain for the task are then Düsselbert and Fanatio. Eldri is a frontline due to sheer lack of options here, as Fizel and Linnell will state later, he is not up to the task either, and well, he gets outplayed by Kosogi, the leader of the mountain goblins, big time as a result, showcasing why you shouldn't have an inexperienced person in the front line. That's the main reason from an experience standpoint. Another main reason is that, as I have highlighted clearly in earlier episodes, Integrity Knights are not Spec Ops soldiers that can be precise with their powers. They are tactical nukes that obliterate the area they are targeting with their memory release functions. The moment you put somebody else in front of Düsselbert and Fanatio to block the push so that they can maybe act as a ranged unit as they are, that means you're throwing a part of your army to be roasted by one of Düsselbert's flaming arrows or to be cut in half by Fanatio's heaven-piercing blade. Yes, those two are ranged units, however due to the nature of their abilities you can't really have a protective line right in front of them as they are not ranged precision units, so that should clear up the confusion regarding the formation. And goddamn, you know shit's serious when the opening kicks in at 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and now, huge props to A1, they have grown competent enough to actually change the text in their opening sequence. Absolute mad lads. The opening now accurately states Alicization exploding rather than Alicization invading, so we did it, boys. Our screeching during Alicization running, turning and dividing has finally achieved its goal. We annoyed A1 enough that they opened their project file, changed the text and re-rendered, which took them about 2 minutes to achieve, so thank you A1, very cool. But going back to the battle, Düsselbert is the first showcase of why that experience is important, not just as a knight, but also as a living being. Remember that Berkuliad never shared the secret behind the creation of the Integrity Knights with the Order to ensure nobody would simply run away from the Order, because it was kind of a scam. However, Kirito had talked to Düsselbert in the tower as Düsso remembered his wife. And that's where the maturity of the character comes into play, as he remains dedicated to protecting the world he lived together with his wife, despite everything else. Of course, you see knights going into perfect weapon control and even memory release phases without chanting elongated commands. The anime shortens them into enhanced armament and release recollection, disregarding their full chants, but if you ever see a weapon initiating their memory abilities, without a chant, you can assume that it was initiated via incarnation, bypassing the chant phase. Especially in War of Underworld, that happens quite often, so don't let that confuse you. That also kind of blurs the line between a simple perfect weapon control and memory release, so do know that unless I'm being very explicit as to which form a weapon is in, it's kinda vague to us light novel readers as well. But yeah, the showcase of power you see through Düsselbert's perfect weapon control is exactly why he doesn't have a shielding line in front of him. If there is anyone, they get destroyed just the same, and that is something the Integrity Knights can never allow. We'll go back to this in a bit. The perspective shifts to Fanatio using her own perfect weapon control and spots the leader of the giant Sigurosik in hopes of eliminating him and causing the giant ranks to fall apart. However, she is so focused on her target that the way Underworld works via the main visualizer causes Sigurosik to feel a chill in his backbone as he realizes he is being hunted. At that moment, Fanatio's focus caused Sigurosik to simply lose all strength for a split second, causing him to slip up, but this showcase of unconscious incarnation used by Fanatio bites the human army in the ass as the light beam of the heaven-piercing blade thus misses its target. But a whole lot more happened in Sigurosik's mind, which the anime can't exactly portray without stopping for a narration, so that's where I extensively take over. But before I do that, we see Fizel and Linel next to Sheta, realizing Eldri has been outplayed and there's something weird with Renly's squadron. In the novels, they actually do take permission from Sheta to leave and check out the circumstances and help if there's any need. The anime for some reason tries to portray the kids as more mischievous than they really are. I'm not really sure what the intention is here, but no, the kids don't hold a grudge towards Kirito. They did not sneak away to go kill Kirito or something. They specifically took permission from their leading officer, Sheta the Silent, to investigate the situation on the left flank and assist them if needed. Then of course we cut to Eldri getting outplayed by the tactical mountain goblins, and the key thing to mention here is that Kosogi, the mountain goblin chief, is not an idiot as you would expect from a goblin. He was aware Emperor Vecta was using them as useless pawns to drain the resources of the human empire, and that's why he had devised a different plan. Similar to the techniques of the assassins, he used smoke bombs in the entire field and got close to the ground by galloping so Eldri's battalion would not be able to target them properly as they slipped past. The anime makes the mistake here, showing one of Eldri's members reporting to the support line of Renly that something is wrong, which makes it seem like this human was faster than the galloping goblins. He wasn't. Goblins aren't even targeting this support group behind Eldri, and they had used the distraction to go further behind the lines instead. There was only one person faster than them, which is Renly Synthesis 27, and we'll see more of him in the next episode. With the worst CGI I have ever seen in my life lasting about 4 seconds in this shot, we go back to Düsselbert and finally get to see the great anime original addition to the series. Well, not really an addition, but rather a minor change. In the novels, the brute flatland goblins have managed to stop being an idiot after a while, and realized being bunched up together caused them to get fried faster, so they started attacking Düsselbert from different angles. In the novels, it was a young man-at-arms leader that remained unnamed who had jumped forward to save Düsselbert, and this had impacted Düsselbert deeply. This man was revealed to be Golgoroso Balto, Yu-Gi-Oh! Senpai at the academy in this episode, which is a change that I really like. But now we go back to Sigurosik, the leader of the Giants. As I said, the anime portrayed what happened as well as it could, really focusing on his fear Sigurosik felt. However, what happened to his Flocklight is not solely due to the fear he's feeling here. You see, what happens to him is exactly what happened to Higa's copy back in episode 6 and what happened to Raios back in episode 10, a soul collapse. If you don't remember what a soul collapse is, I strongly recommend you visit my episode 6 and 10 explained videos for a more in-depth description, but at its core, it's a Flocklight entering a paradox or a segfault, as those of you with computer engineering knowledge would understand, and Sigurosik here is stuck between two major different directives. The first one is the Dark Territories Taboo Index, the one rule in the region, take with strength. This rule dictates a subject to be strong and fearless, as well as obeying the stronger. For Sigurosik, Fanatio is definitely the weaker creature here, so for all intents and purposes, what his mind knows is that Sigurosik is stronger than her. On top of this, Sig is also ordered by the absolute figure of strength in the Dark Territory, Emperor Vecta, to continue the assault. On the other hand, however, going a bit back before we trailed off to Duso and Eldri, it's the incarnation Sigurosik felt chilling his spine, rendering him motionless, that is fueling the fear, preventing him from doing what's necessary according to the one rule of the Dark Territory. Someone with a higher violation index can go as far as triggering the seal of the right eye in this case, but Sigurosik is not that strong-willed. While his right eye does start getting red, the novels don't explicitly state him to have received this seal of the right eye at all, so he's either close to triggering it or it's simply his Flocklight error that is causing it. The red light is also mentioned in the novel, but it's not explicitly stated as to what it is. But what happens here is that he's stuck between the two things that's preventing him to obey the other, and his soul starts collapsing. But as a giant, he's more primitive than humans in terms of his mind, so his soul gets out of the collapsing process before an entire meltdown, but a great deal of damage has been done to him already, and what's left of him is the pure intent to kill. And what happens after is incarnation at its fullest. With his entire killing intent being focused on Fanatio now, it's her who is at the whim of someone else's incarnation and completely freezes under the weight of Sigurosik's intent. And that is the explanation of what's happening. I hope it's clear enough. If it isn't, please do ask questions where you have trouble following. With the knowledge I have, it's really easy for me to understand the whole process, but it may not seem that way for someone who isn't all that well versed, so I strongly encourage you to ask further if you feel like something feels off based on my explanation here, and I'll make sure to further elaborate. But this brings us to the most badass scene in the entire episode, as Dakira realizes that Fanatio has been frozen and takes it upon herself to protect her, and goddamn, this moment is so well animated. From far away, you don't see how gigantic the giants actually are, but here, Dakira is barely half the size of Sig. His hammer is larger than her entire forearm, and the way the impact just escalates, breaking her sword, then her gauntlets, then the entire bone structure in her body, as she is relegated to using her body akin to a brick you use to stop a door from crashing, smashing her head into the hammer, etc. It's just an incredibly impactfully animated scene. But with Sigurosik deflected and his concentration broken for a second, Fanatio manages to break free from her frozen state to tend to Dakira. And while Dakira had an entire backstory explained in this instance that's pushing her to save Fanatio, it was skipped in the anime. I can't really blame them for cutting this out, as I too would feel like it would break the pacing a lot. Even in the novels, the backstory felt a little abrupt, so to say, but the gist of it is, the Kira in her life before becoming an Integrity Knight was a little girl who held romantic feelings for another female. She never acted upon those feelings, thus never really breached the taboo index by being with another woman, but she had felt bad and decided to confess at a local church. However, her confession was picked up by the Axiom Church senators, and thus she was brought in to become an Integrity Knight. Over time, she had grown feelings for Fanatio too, and above all else, she felt ashamed that 6 months ago she was powerless to protect her superior against the 2 rebels that invaded the Central Cathedral. She had sworn that day that she would never let Fanatio be harmed because of her incompetence, and that was why she had leapt forward to protect Fanatio, knowing full well she would not survive the endeavor. But she didn't care, all she wanted to do was to protect her loved one, and that final goal she had succeeded to the best of her abilities. And thus, the Kira had become the first casualty of the Integrity Knight ranks in the War of Underworld. But with Fanatio having recovered her resolve, also fueled by the bravery of her subordinate, she could stand up again without being affected by Sigrosig's incarnation. Her heaven-piercing blade started rising up from the ground on its own to place itself in the hand of its master. As she lifted it up, the sparkles gathered to form the largest beam of light she had ever produced, and both armies watched in complete shock as that beam of light split the biggest creature in the entire underworld in half like going through smooth butter. Giants had lost their leadership, and the center front line was now pushing forward. In the meanwhile, right flank under Düsselbert's lead was not faring well. Human army soldiers were dying left and right to the hordes of goblins, and Düsselbert had realized that his flaming arrows were not killing the goblins fast enough. In fact, it's one of those details that the anime included in its visual, that the goblins were using the bodies of their deceased as shield against all the fire, and thus were getting closer without being burned. And once Düsselbert had ran out of arrows, they no longer had any reason to be slowed down by them. Well, not as skilled as he is with a bow, Düsselbert proves that an Integrity Knight is never to be underestimated even without their preferred weapon. And this fight is word by word to the light novels, cutting through 3 enemies and the 4th one simply slashing through the body of another goblin so Düsselbert wouldn't see him. In the final moment, he just blocks the blow with his gauntlet, completely shattering his control over his left arm, getting pinned down by the remaining 2, and only Golgoroso saving him at the final second from Shibori. Overall, a wonderful sequence with amazing attention to detail, and well, that's when Düsso decides to become a true archer worthy of being invited to a Holy Grail war, engulfing himself and his sword in such strong flames that the goblins on his legs disintegrate in a second, and using his sword attached to his bow as the catalyst for his memory release without even chanting anything, and unleashing the flames of the Phoenix that once resided in the biggest and oldest volcano of the Southern Empire to destroy the goblin chief Shibori and the rest of the horde behind him. But that brings us to the final moments of the episode. Now is your chance to have thoughts about what Berkuli is doing in the meanwhile, seemingly completely out of the battling range. He has 2 questions to ask: the situation of his own army and the situation about the enemy's aerial forces, as he looks up to the sky, exactly at the location where the sky changes color with a thick line of blur marking the border between both regions. That's all I will say about Berkuli, and I will give props to A1 that they have already adapted his trump card that is teased in this scene properly without being in your face. And that leads us to the final moment where Alice is using a trick she had learned from Fanatio, who had learned it from Kirito back on the 50th floor of the Central Cathedral, to collect all the spatial resources to end the skirmish once and for all. Don't ask me what the giant ball of light is, I already told you more than enough here. Dissect my words and guess what it is and how she's doing it. Until the next episode, I will not say another word on it because that would be spoilers. Also, please don't ask me why Renly ran away. Next episode will cover all of that as well, so stay a bit patient. But with that, we move on to the opinions. Voice acting was marvelous, animation was great, the emotions were incredibly high, barely anything was cut, incredible attention to detail was included in the animation, and an absolutely frabjous soundtrack accompanied it all. Meanwhile, I can already imagine all the warlocks in the crowd asking to themselves what frabjous means. Silly warlocks. As I mentioned in my tweets and the YouTube story post, War of Underworld episode 6 was by far my favorite episode in the entire Alicization run, including the first half. Those of you who followed me for a while know that I am kinda stingy when it comes to judging Alicization adaptation, with my only real standouts being the likes of the Human Realm Arc Episode 10, Kirito vs Fanatio fight, and a little bit of Kirito vs Yu-Gi-Oh fight, along with the War of Underworld Episode 4. So, above everyone else, those of you who followed me for a while should know that it means a lot when I say this episode was the best episode so far. And you know I don't take this matter lightly. It was a great episode, it was as flawless of an adaptation as an adaptation can get. Surprisingly, despite being impressive, it was Fate Grand Order that stumbled a little this week. The pacing of FGO episode 7 was weird, as if we were skipping a bunch of key points, but that's for me to cover in Fate Grand Opinions. Next episode of War of Underworld is titled Brand of a Failure according to our translation, whereas Crunchyroll decided to be a whole lot more literal, coming up with a very silly title, Stigma of the Disqualified. Like, Jesus Christ, Crunchy, this is as crazy as changing Night of the Blazing Sun into Relentless Night back during the Fanatio episode. Either way, going with our more proper translation, Brand of a Failure, we'll focus on the two failures of knights, Eldri, who was merely outplayed by the horde of goblins, and the actual failure of a knight, Renly Synthesis 27, who abandoned his post at the left flank support battalion. We'll also reunite with Tiza and Ronya watching over Kirito, so you'll have more dual wheeling screen time. But if you made it this far, comment Golgoroso Senpai finally spoke to let me know. Ask your questions and use hashtag AskGamerTurk for weekly War of Underworld Q&A. If your question is spoilery, add a spoiler warning. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for all of that and more. Links to Alicization light novels, manga, and more are in the description. Channel merch is there as well, with a special discount code for patrons and channel members too. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members as always. Until next time, stay cool.